Everyone laughed at the quiet girl in class. Until she took the stage, the fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a low, insistent buzz that vibrated in my teeth. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that fought their way through the grimy windows, illuminating the stale air. I sat at the prosecution table, a knot of anticipation tightening in my stomach, a familiar sensation that usually signaled the sweet taste of victory. My gaze swept over the faces in the gallery, a sea of anonymous onlookers, some curious, some bored, but none, I assumed, truly invested in the grim theater unfolding before them. My focus, however, was drawn to the defendant's table. There sat Sergeant Marcus Vance, a man whose imposing frame seemed to shrink under the weight of the accusation. Black, decorated, and utterly silent. My case against him was built on a bedrock of perceived injustice, a narrative of entitlement and arrogance I had meticulously crafted. I saw his uniform, crisp and adorned with medals, not as a testament to valor, but as a shield for his supposed transgressions. I saw the stoic set of his jaw, not as quiet dignity, but as defiant pride. My own career had been a relentless climb, a constant battle to prove myself in a world that often underestimated me. This drive had honed a sharp edge, a tendency to see things in stark black and white, to judge quickly and decisively. I prided myself on my sharp intellect, my ability to dissect a case and expose its flaws. But somewhere along the way, that sharpness had hardened into a rigid certainty, a dismissal of nuance. The quiet girl in class, the one who never spoke up, was a distant memory, a ghost of a past I barely recognized. My world had become about winning, about the intellectual thrill of the chase and the satisfaction of a verdict delivered. I had learned to anticipate every move, every defense, every potential loophole. The law, to me, was a puzzle, and I was exceptionally good at putting its pieces together to form an image that served my purpose. And in Sergeant Vance's case, the image I saw was one of guilt. I had spent weeks poring over reports, interviewing witnesses, building a narrative that painted him as a man who had stepped outside the bounds of acceptable conduct, a man who, despite his accolades, had fallen from grace. The Medal of Honor, displayed prominently on his chest, felt like a taunt, a symbol of a past heroism that, in my eyes, did nothing to absolve him of the present charges. I believed with unwavering conviction that justice demanded accountability and that his silence was a confession. The courtroom was a stage, and I was the maestro, conducting a symphony of accusation. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a pre-performance buzz that I found exhilarating. I adjusted my tie, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that spoke volumes about my internal readiness. The judge, a stern figure with an impassive face, was about to call the court to order, and I felt a surge of adrenaline, the familiar precursor to the intellectual combat I relished. I was confident, prepared, and utterly convinced of my righteousness. The narrative I had constructed was, in my mind, unassailable, a testament to the power of objective truth. I saw only the evidence, the facts, as I had interpreted them, and the man I believed them to condemn. The complexities of his life, the pressures he might have faced, the silent battles he might have fought, these were all extraneous details, irrelevant to the legal framework I operated within. My world was one of clear lines, and Sergeant Vance, in my estimation, had crossed one of them. The prosecutor's opening statement was a carefully constructed edifice of doubt, each word a precisely placed brick designed to chip away at Sergeant Vance's reputation. I laid out the timeline, the alleged infractions, the testimonies that, when viewed through my lens, painted a damning picture. I spoke of duty, of honor, of the sacred trust placed in those who wear the uniform. And then I presented the evidence that, in my unshakable opinion, proved Sergeant Vance had betrayed that trust. My voice, calm and measured, filled the courtroom, each syllable carrying the weight of my conviction. I saw the subtle shifts in the jury's expressions, the nods of agreement, the furrowed brows. I was weaving a spell, and they were falling under its influence. Sergeant Vance, meanwhile, remained a statue of quiet resignation. His eyes, when they met mine, were unreadable, a deep, dark pool that offered no reflection of the turmoil I assumed raged within him. He offered no defense, No outburst. No plea. His silence was a profound enigma, a void that I, in my certainty, filled with my own interpretations of guilt. The judge, a man known for his strict adherence to procedure, listened intently, his gaze occasionally flickering between me and the defendant. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable anticipation of the coming storm. I felt the familiar rush of power, the intellectual exhilaration of guiding the narrative, of shaping perception. My strategy was simple: let the evidence speak for itself, and then amplify its message with my own authoritative interpretation. I had anticipated every counter-argument, every potential defense, and I believed I had dismantled them all before they could even be voiced. My confidence was not born of arrogance, but of meticulous preparation and an unwavering belief in the justice of my cause. I saw this case as a clear-cut demonstration of accountability, a necessary affirmation of the principles I held dear. The medals on Sergeant Vance's uniform, which I had pointedly referenced, were not, in my view, a shield against scrutiny, but a testament to a past that had no bearing on the present allegations. His continued silence only solidified my conviction. It was the quiet of someone who had no plausible defense, no righteous indignation to offer. I was, in essence, speaking for the evidence, for the law, and for the jury's presumed understanding of right and wrong. I saw the faces in the gallery, a mosaic of emotions, but I remained detached, focused solely on the task at hand. My world, at that moment, was confined to the four walls of the courtroom, to the interplay of accusation and defense, to the intricate dance of legal strategy. The quiet girl I once was felt 1,000,000 miles away, a faint echo from a life that had been entirely different, a life before the relentless pursuit of victory had become my sole driving force. The defense attorney, a young woman with an earnest, almost desperate energy, finally stood. Her voice, when she spoke, was a stark contrast to my own assured cadence. She spoke of context, of duty under fire, of the fog of war. She introduced a single, worn photograph, a faded image of Sergeant Vance, younger, his face etched with the strain of combat, surrounded by a small, jubilant group of soldiers. She spoke of a mission gone terribly wrong, of split-second decisions made under unimaginable pressure. She presented a different narrative, one where heroism was not a shield, but a burden, and where judgment, from a comfortable distance, was a luxury the men on the ground could not afford. Her words hung in the air, a subtle challenge to the certainty I had so carefully cultivated. The jury shifted, their expressions now tinged with a flicker of uncertainty. I felt a prickle of irritation, a disruption to the smooth flow of my carefully orchestrated performance. I had dismissed the possibility of mitigating circumstances, focusing solely on the letter of the law. Her presentation, though lacking the polished confidence of my own, had planted a seed of doubt, a subtle dissonance in the narrative I had so firmly established. I watched Sergeant Vance. For the first time, a flicker of something other than stoicism crossed his face. It wasn't defiance, but a deep, profound weariness, a sorrow that seemed to emanate from his very bones. He didn't look at the photograph, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the courtroom, lost in a memory I couldn't fathom. The young attorney's words, however, had done little to shake my core belief. My job was to present the facts as they applied to the law, and I had done that. The complexities of battlefield decisions, while perhaps tragic, did not, in my view, negate the evidence of misconduct. The legal system demanded a certain standard, regardless of the circumstances that might have led to its transgression. I saw her attempts as emotional appeals, designed to sway the jury with sentiment rather than logic. My confidence, though momentarily unsettled, remained largely intact. I was prepared to counter her narrative, to reassert the dominance of the facts and the law. The courtroom, once a stage for my assured performance, now felt like a battleground, the air thick with a new kind of tension, one born not of my own making, but of an unexpected challenge to my carefully constructed reality. I felt a strange disconnect, a sense of being an observer in my own unfolding drama. The meticulous edifice I had built began to feel less like a fortress and more like a house of cards, vulnerable to the slightest gust of wind. The judge's questions to Sergeant Vance were sharp, probing, cutting through the defense attorney's carefully worded narrative. He asked about specific actions, about orders given and received, about the chain of command. And then, in a voice that resonated with quiet authority, he asked Sergeant Vance to speak about the medal. The courtroom fell silent, the hum of the lights suddenly deafening. Sergeant Vance's gaze, which had been fixed on some distant point, slowly lowered. His eyes, those dark pools I had found so unreadable, now held a profound sadness, a raw vulnerability that was utterly disarming. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, rough and unused, yet clear. He didn't recount heroic feats or grand pronouncements. Instead, he spoke of the weight of command, of the impossible choices. He described the chaos, the fear, the desperate struggle to protect the lives entrusted to him. He spoke of a moment, a split second where the lives of his men hung in the balance, and the agonizing decision he had to make. He didn't ask for understanding or forgiveness. He simply laid bare the truth of that moment, the burden he had carried ever since. He spoke of the faces of the men he had lost, their names a soft litany whispered into the silence. He described the medal, not as a symbol of triumph, but as a constant, heavy reminder of the lives he couldn't save, of the choices that haunted his every waking moment. His voice cracked, not with emotion, but with the sheer, unvarnished weight of his words. He spoke of the quiet girl in class, not directly, but through the lens of his own profound regret. The regret of a man who had once judged others harshly, only to find himself in a situation where judgment seemed a cruel mockery. He spoke of the young soldier, barely more than a boy, whose life had been extinguished in that moment, and the crushing responsibility that fell upon him. He looked directly at me then, and for the first time, I saw not a defendant, but a man broken by the very honor he had been awarded. The carefully constructed narrative I had presented began to crumble, not under the force of legal argument, but under the quiet, devastating weight of human experience. The medals on his uniform no longer seemed like a taunt, but like scars, each one a testament to a battle fought, a life risked, and a burden carried. My own certainty felt hollow, my victory a hollow echo. The stark black and white I had always seen began to blur, revealing a spectrum of gray I had never allowed myself to acknowledge. My initial judgment, so swift and absolute, now felt like a profound failure, a testament to my own emotional blindness. The jury's verdict was not guilty. The pronouncement hung in the air, a quiet release of tension that settled over the courtroom like a shroud. I felt a strange, disorienting calm, a sense of detachment as the proceedings wound down. Sergeant Vance, his shoulders slightly less burdened, offered a brief, almost imperceptible nod to his attorney. He didn't look at me. I gathered my papers, the carefully crafted arguments now feeling like brittle, lifeless husks. As people began to file out, I saw Sergeant Vance pause by the door, his hand resting on the frame as if for support. He turned, his gaze finally meeting mine. There was no anger, no triumph, only a profound, quiet understanding that seemed to pierce through my carefully constructed defenses. He didn't offer a handshake or a word of admonishment. He simply held my gaze for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the shared space of human frailty, before turning and walking out into the sunlight. The courtroom, now mostly empty, felt cavernous and cold. The hum of the lights seemed louder, more insistent. A mournful drone. I sat alone at the table, the weight of my own judgment pressing down on me. The crisp uniform, the medals, the stoic demeanor. I had seen them as arrogance, as a shield. Now, I understood them as the outward manifestation of an immense inner burden, a testament to sacrifices I had never truly comprehended. The quiet girl in class, the one who flinched at loud noises and kept her head down, felt like a ghost in the room, a reminder of a sensitivity I had long suppressed. My drive to win, my need to be right, had blinded me to the complexities of human experience, to the profound, often silent struggles that shape us. I had seen a case, a legal battle, an opportunity to prove myself. I had failed to see a man, a soul carrying the unbearable weight of consequence. The victory I had sought, the validation I had craved, now felt like ashes in my mouth. The intellectual satisfaction I usually derived from a successful prosecution was replaced by a hollow ache, a gnawing sense of regret. I had been so focused on the letter of the law that I had lost sight of its spirit, of the empathy that should underpin any pursuit of justice. The walk from the courthouse felt longer than usual, the city streets a blur of indifferent faces. The sunlight, once a symbol of clarity, now felt harsh, exposing the shadows I had been so adept at ignoring. I saw the world differently, the sharp edges of my perception softened, blurred by a newfound awareness of the invisible burdens others carried. The city's noise, once a mere backdrop, now seemed filled with 1,000 unspoken stories, each one a testament to resilience to loss, to the quiet battles fought in the privacy of one's own heart. I thought of Sergeant Vance, not as a defendant, but as a man carrying a weight I could barely imagine, a weight that had been amplified by my own unyielding judgment. The medals, once symbols of a past I had dismissed, now represented a profound, continuous sacrifice, a silent testament to the human cost of duty and the agonizing weight of consequence. The righteous certainty that had fueled my career now felt like a brittle shell, cracked and hollowed by the profound realization of my own limited understanding. The echoes of the courtroom still reverberated, not with the clash of legal arguments, but with the quiet resonance of a man's truth. The medals on his uniform were not adornments of pride, but markers of a profound, enduring sorrow. In the quiet spaces between breaths, understanding began to bloom. The weight of Sergeant Vance's quiet dignity settled on me like a physical presence, a stark counterpoint to the intellectual edifice I had so proudly constructed. It wasn't just about winning a case anymore. It was about the profound, unsettling realization that my pursuit of justice had been skewed by a narrow, unforgiving lens. The medals, which I had once viewed as symbols of a past that excused present failings, now represented a continuous, unspoken narrative of sacrifice and impossible choices. This understanding shifted my perspective from a courtroom adversary to a fellow human navigating immense pressure. My own drive, once a source of pride, now felt like a potential blind spot, a relentless engine that had propelled me forward without sufficient regard for the human cost of my certainty. It dawned on me that the very clarity I valued could, in fact, be a form of blindness, a refusal to acknowledge the messy, often contradictory nature of human experience. Furthermore, the encounter forced a re-evaluation of what constitutes true strength. I had always equated strength with intellectual prowess, with the ability to dissect, to argue, to win. Sergeant Vance, however, embodied a different kind of fortitude, a silent, enduring resilience forged in the crucible of combat and carried with a profound sense of responsibility. His quietness, which I had interpreted as guilt, was in fact a testament to a deep internal struggle, a burden of memory and consequence that he bore with a stoicism I could only begin to fathom. This realization was humbling, challenging my deeply ingrained definitions of competence and character. It suggested that true strength might lie not in outward victory, but in the quiet endurance of hardship and the unwavering commitment to one's principles, even when those principles lead to unimaginable personal cost. Building on this, however, my own professional trajectory suddenly seemed less about an upward climb and more about a relentless pursuit of validation, a need to prove my own worth through a series of intellectual victories. The sterile environment of legal strategy had, I now saw, insulated me from the raw, often painful realities of the lives affected by the law. My focus had been on the abstract principles, on the logical progression of arguments, rather than on the tangible human impact. The sterile hum of the courtroom lights, which had once signaled an arena of intellectual combat, now felt like a symbol of my own emotional detachment, a constant, low-level buzz that had drowned out the subtler, more complex frequencies of human experience. Consequently, I began to question the very foundation of my approach. Had my pursuit of truth inadvertently created a narrative that served my own ego rather than actual justice? The ease with which I had dismissed Sergeant Vance's situation, the swiftness of my judgment, now struck me as a profound ethical failing. It wasn't just about being wrong. It was about the moral implications of being so rigidly, so confidently wrong. This introspection wasn't comfortable. It was a jarring confrontation with my own limitations, a forced reckoning with the possibility that my dedication to the law had, in some ways, led me astray from a deeper, more compassionate understanding of justice. Consequently, the memory of the quiet girl in class resurfaced not as a distant echo, but as a potent reminder of a sensitivity I had systematically suppressed. That innate capacity for empathy, buried beneath layers of ambition and professional rigor, was now stirring. It suggested a path forward, not of abandoning my profession, but of infusing it with a more nuanced understanding, a recognition that behind every case, every legal argument, lies a human story, often far more complex and profound than any single piece of evidence could reveal. This internal shift wasn't about declaring myself a better person, but about acknowledging a fundamental truth, that true wisdom often lies in recognizing the vastness of what we don't know, and in approaching others with a humility born of that awareness. The quiet nods I received from colleagues after the verdict felt less like congratulations and more like a subtle acknowledgement of my perceived overreach. There was an unspoken understanding in the air, a shared recognition that my aggressive prosecution of Sergeant Vance had perhaps crossed a line. This wasn't about the legal outcome, which was technically a win for the defense, but about the underlying ethical currents that had been stirred. My initial confidence, once a source of unshakable resolve, now felt like a brittle facade, easily shattered by the weight of introspection. The courtroom's sterile environment, which had always felt like a sanctuary of logic and order, now seemed like a place where fundamental human truths had been obscured by my own ambition. The very tools I had honed, my sharp intellect, my meticulous preparation, my unwavering certainty, had in this instance served to isolate me from a deeper understanding of justice, one that encompassed empathy and a recognition of complex human fallibility. Now consider how this applies when you face a situation where your own deeply held beliefs are challenged not by external logic, but by an internal shift in perspective. It's the moment when the very foundations of your certainty begin to waver, not because of an opposing argument, but because of a dawning awareness of your own limitations. Furthermore, the experience exposed a critical blind spot in my professional development, the tendency to view individuals solely through the lens of their alleged transgressions, rather than as multifaceted beings shaped by a lifetime of experiences, pressures, and burdens. Sergeant Vance's stoicism, which I had interpreted as defiance, was revealed through his quiet testimony as a profound testament to enduring hardship, a silent carrying of immense responsibility. This compelled me to re-examine how I approached cases, moving beyond a mere assessment of facts and evidence to a more holistic understanding of the human element. It wasn't about excusing misconduct, but about recognizing the intricate tapestry of circumstances that can lead to difficult choices and the profound internal struggles that often accompany them. This realization necessitated a recalibration of my professional compass, urging a deeper consideration of context and the often invisible battles individuals face. Building on this, however, the encounter with Sergeant Vance prompted a critical self-assessment of my own motivations. My relentless drive for professional achievement, once a source of pride, now appeared as a potential mechanism for self-validation, a need to prove my own competence and worth, through a series of perceived intellectual victories. The courtroom, which I had viewed as an arena for objective truth-seeking, now felt like a stage where my own ego had often played a leading role. This introspection was not about self-recrimination, but about a necessary reorientation, a shift from seeking external validation to cultivating an internal ethical compass that prioritized genuine understanding and compassion over the mere pursuit of winning. It highlighted the subtle ways ambition can, if left unchecked, overshadow the fundamental principles of fairness and empathy that should guide any pursuit of justice. Consequently, the memory of the quiet girl in class, once a distant, almost forgotten aspect of my past, began to resurface with a newfound significance. Her innate sensitivity, a trait I had long since suppressed in favor of a more hardened, pragmatic exterior, now represented a potential pathway back to a more balanced perspective. This wasn't a call to revert to a former self, but an acknowledgement that the empathy and nuanced understanding I had discarded were not weaknesses, but essential components of a truly comprehensive approach to justice. It suggested that the ability to feel, to connect, and to understand the emotional underpinnings of human action were not impediments to effectiveness, but rather crucial elements that could enrich and deepen the practice of law. The quiet nods I received from colleagues after the verdict felt less like congratulations and more like a subtle acknowledgement of my perceived overreach. There was an unspoken understanding in the air, a shared recognition that my aggressive prosecution of Sergeant Vance had perhaps crossed a line. This wasn't about the legal outcome, which was technically a win for the defense, but about the underlying ethical currents that had been stirred. My initial confidence, once a source of unshakable resolve, now felt like a brittle facade, easily shattered by the weight of introspection. The courtroom's sterile environment, which had always felt like a sanctuary of logic and order, now seemed like a place where fundamental human truths had been obscured by my own ambition. The very tools I had honed, my sharp intellect, my meticulous preparation, my unwavering certainty, had, in this instance, served to isolate me from a deeper understanding of justice, one that encompassed empathy and a recognition of complex human fallibility. Now, consider how this applies when you face a situation where your own deeply held beliefs are challenged not by external logic, but by an internal shift in perspective. It's the moment when the very foundations of your certainty begin to waver, not because of an opposing argument, but because of a dawning awareness of your own limitations. Furthermore, the encounter exposed a critical blind spot in my professional development: the tendency to view individuals solely through the lens of their alleged transgressions, rather than as multifaceted beings shaped by a lifetime of experiences, pressures, and burdens. Sergeant Vance's stoicism, which I had interpreted as defiance, was revealed through his quiet testimony as a profound testament to enduring hardship, a silent carrying of immense responsibility. This compelled me to re-examine how I approached cases, moving beyond a mere assessment of facts and evidence to a more holistic understanding of the human element. It wasn't about excusing misconduct, but about recognizing the intricate tapestry of circumstances that can lead to difficult choices, and the profound internal struggles that often accompany them. This realization necessitated a recalibration of my professional compass, urging a deeper consideration of context and the often invisible battles individuals face. Building on this, however, the encounter with Sergeant Vance prompted a critical self-assessment of my own motivations. My relentless drive for professional achievement, once a source of pride, now appeared as a potential mechanism for self-validation, a need to prove my own competence and worth through a series of perceived intellectual victories. The courtroom, which I had viewed as an arena for objective truth-seeking, now felt like a stage where my own ego had often played a leading role. This introspection was not about self-recrimination, but about a necessary reorientation, a shift from seeking external validation to cultivating an internal ethical compass that prioritized genuine understanding and compassion over the mere pursuit of winning. It highlighted the subtle ways ambition can, if left unchecked, overshadow the fundamental principles of fairness and empathy that should guide any pursuit of justice. Consequently, the memory of the quiet girl in class, once a distant, almost forgotten aspect of my past, began to resurface with a newfound significance. Her innate sensitivity, a trait I had long since suppressed in favor of a more hardened, pragmatic exterior, now represented a potential pathway back to a more balanced perspective. This wasn't a call to revert to a former self, but an acknowledgement that the empathy and nuanced understanding I had discarded were not weaknesses, but essential components of a truly comprehensive approach to justice. It suggested that the ability to feel, to connect, and to understand the emotional underpinnings of human action were not impediments to effectiveness, but rather crucial elements that could enrich and deepen the practice of law. The silence of the courtroom after the verdict was not empty, but pregnant with unspoken implications. It was a quiet that forced introspection, a stark contrast to the clamor of accusation I had orchestrated. My meticulously constructed arguments, once sharp instruments of conviction, now felt like blunt tools, incapable of carving out the nuanced truth of human experience. The urge to dissect the legal precedents, to analyze the jury's decision through a purely logical framework, still tugged at me, a residual habit of thought. Yet, a deeper current was pulling me away from that analytical refuge. I found myself replaying Sergeant Vance's words, not for their legal implications, but for their raw emotional resonance. His description of the battlefield, of the impossible choices, wasn't a defense in the traditional sense. It was a confession of the profound burden of command, a burden that transcended legal statutes. It was the quiet strength of his weariness, the palpable weight of lives lost, that began to chip away at my rigid certainty. The memory of the quiet girl in class, once a distant echo, now resonates with a newfound clarity. Her sensitivity, a trait I had long since dismissed as a weakness in the arena of professional combat, now appears as an essential element, a vital compass for navigating the intricate landscape of human interaction. It is the capacity to feel, to connect, and to truly see another's struggle that forms the bedrock of genuine understanding. My pursuit of justice, I now understand, must be infused with this capacity, not as a concession to sentimentality, but as a fundamental requirement for ethical practice. The sterile objectivity I once championed now feels incomplete, lacking the vital dimension of human empathy. The true practice begins now, not in the courtroom, but in the quiet spaces between interactions, in the conscious effort to see beyond the immediate accusation, to recognize the unseen burdens, and to approach each individual with the humility that comes from acknowledging our shared fallibility. It is in the deliberate cultivation of a more compassionate lens, the willingness to listen not just to words, but to the silence that often speaks volumes, and to understand that true strength often lies not in unwavering certainty, but in the courage to question our own. The echoes of that courtroom and the quiet dignity of a man who carried his honor like a burden will forever remind me that justice, in its most profound sense, is an act of profound and often difficult empathy.